Dr. Shelley, thank you. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Gender Dynamics of the E-Mobility Space panel. We have some excellent panelists today, and in their introductions, they're going to focus on their current and past work as relevant to gender dynamics of the e-mobility space. Why don't we start with you, Justine?
Hi, everyone. My name is Justine Johnson, and for those who might be watching from all around the world, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Just a really quick background about myself. I am currently working with Ford Mobility, so I head mobility engagement for the Southern California region and for the Southwest region of the United States. So really excited to be here as part of the discussion. Prior to joining Ford, I worked in government for about 8 years. So I worked at the Taxi and Limousine Commission and as well as the New York City Economic Development Corporation. In all of those spaces, I'd say transportation as a whole has been dominated by, it's a male-dominated industry in many ways. And so being a woman in the space has often been a very at many times it can be fun, it can be isolating, it can be exciting, lonely, challenging, all of the above. But yeah, I'm happy to be here to have this discussion. And just a quick background about Ford Mobility. Ford Mobility, it's funny, a subsidiary of Ford Motor Company, where we talk about a lot of different things from micromobility. We have a micromobility business to micro transit, where we also talk about software as a service for micro transit, and all the way to autonomous vehicles, and really thinking about the future of the next vehicle and vehicle type and fleet. So I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you, Justine. Chanel.
Hello. Hello, everyone. I am Chanel Parson. Happy to be here with you. I work at Southern California Edison. So that is an electric utility in Southern California. We have 50,000 square miles as our territory. And for e-mobility, we have a number of infrastructure and rebate programs. So for example, in July of this year, we just launched the largest light duty EV charging infrastructure program in the country, where we're installing 38,000 EV charging stations in our service territory. We also have a medium and heavy duty infrastructure program. And then for the state of California, we run the point of sale rebate for brand new EVs, the purchase of brand new EVs, as well as we have a pre-owned EV program where we give rebates to individuals. So we are all about accelerating the adoption of electric vehicles at Southern California Edison. And a little bit about myself personally, I've been in the utility space for the last 16 years. So I've done a number of roles in the utility, from electric distribution operations to regulatory, and really loved my role in e-mobility. I must say I've just transitioned to a new role, which will come up as part of the discussion in this gender dynamics, actually. But I'm very happy to be here supporting and representing e-mobility. And that's a little bit about me and what we do at Southern California Edison.
Thank you, Chanel. Candace.
Hi, everyone. I'm Candace Amelia. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm from San Diego, which is on ancestral Kumeyaay land, but currently I'm in Michigan, and I work for General Motors. I've been here about 4 and a half months, so I'm relatively new to GM, and I work as an EV charging analyst. My role really is focused on ensuring that we have equitable access to charging infrastructure. So I'm really dedicated to figuring out, how do we get charging into multifamily housing? That's something that is just so tough. And quite frankly, I don't have a solution just yet, and I'm navigating through all of that, but excited to take on this challenge and ensure that we have, charging for folks who rent, who live in apartments, townhomes, condos, for the communities that deserve it the most. And previously I worked at some really great nonprofits like the Foundation for California Community Colleges, Grid Alternatives, as well as the Center for Sustainable Energy. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Candace. Boy, when you figure out that multi-unit dwelling charging solution, just give me a call. I'm Amy Hillman. I'm moderating this panel. It's a real honor. I did start in more than 10 years ago in charging. under the EV project in Portland, Oregon, and I have worked with Blink for 9 years, and then I left about a year and a half ago to come over to OpConnect, a BIPOC-owned charging company based in Portland, Oregon, but operating all over the country. And one thing in the practice session, we had a great conversation, of course, and we definitely want you, anyone attending, to get to have the knowledge from these fine women of what the gender dynamics have looked like, but also what's some practical information. So what I'm wondering, and we'll kind of maybe go in the same order and mix it up some, is what types of experiences have you specifically had related to being a diverse woman in the e-mobility space? Justine?
Sure. So my experiences, for the most part, I think, have really brought me to where I am today, right? So I work for a large automaker and I had mobility engagement. But I say all that to say is, I think about kind of that past of where I crawled from and where I'm walking to now. And in many ways, my experience has been like, going into a room, physical room or on digital rooms where essentially I am talking to people who look nothing like me. I guess when you think about even from race and gender, we're just not the same. And having to, I think the gender dynamic there is something that is really big. But it also has let me be or maybe check in with myself to remind myself I'm here for a reason. My experiences actually matter. My perspectives are important. And in many ways, I think starting off in my career, that was something that was very intimidating, right? Where you walk into a room and you're like, okay, no one looks like me, right? And how do you present your perspective and really feel that confidence? So I think that was something that I had to, one, address with myself and really make sure that I, reminded myself very regularly, like, you matter, you're supposed to be in the room. If you weren't in the room, then, the perspective of transportation planning from a woman's perspective or from a Black woman's perspective is not going to be considered. So it's my duty to actually use my voice to bring up some of the challenges that do impact women when we think about our ability on e-mobility, micromobility, from e-scooters all the way to thinking about the future of autonomous vehicles. I think that perspective is so important, especially as we think about how technology is also a big factor in this conversation of transportation, right? We're not just talking about archaic systems. We're talking about a mix of the systems that work today, whether those are public transit, you're using your own vehicles, all the way to thinking about the technology that's actually self-driving and looking around at kind of everyone in the landscape. So I think for me, I have learned to tap more into my differences because I do think it's important to have that voice and to have that perspective at the table. So that's just been a lot of my background, and that's been from everything working at the Taxi and Limousine Commission to talking about ferries and maritime transportation to now thinking about this new world of e-mobility and e-transportation. So all of this is very important and critical, and essentially it is very important to have women at the table, and especially diverse women at that.
Thank you. Chanel?
Yeah, I will say I have a little bit of an interesting story. And when I joined the utility, not in the mobility space, I was really young. I still am Black and a woman, and I kind of was like unicorn. There weren't many of me around, or any of me around for the most part. And I recall a lot of people asking me how I got a job, at the company, if I had relatives that worked there. And, those were some of those, backhanded compliments or questions or microaggressions, just how do you legitimize your presence here? But I must say, by the time that I did come to the e-mobility space, I was a senior leader, a senior manager at the company, and I came into the space. And prior to me coming into the space, there were successful women who had led our e-mobility organization and had gotten promoted to the executive ranks, and that's why they left. And so because there were women who were in that role and they were successful in that role, when I came into the role, there wasn't much of a question of, you know, because I'm a woman is, you know, could I be successful? It had been done before. And so very grateful to the women who came before me and who killed it, basically. And allowed me to walk into the door without some of these preconceived notions that a lot of us have in a lot of spaces we walk into, because within my company, it had been done before. And so for me, I look at my responsibilities in a number of ways. One, you know, making sure I kill it so that the next woman that comes behind me, you know, doesn't have that question mark on her forehead before she even says or does anything, right? Because, you know, prior people who look like her, you know, maybe didn't do a great job. I have the responsibility for coaching and mentoring other women and giving them opportunities, those that deserve it. I think it's very important. Not only do we have diversity in this space from gender, from ethnicity, and from experience, age. I mean, so many angles we need diversity, but it's also important that, you know, you aren't the only one, right? And if you're in a position to help with that, obviously you don't want to just bring any woman into the space just to have a company. You want to make sure this is someone who's competent and can represent well, and, you know, has definitely earned the space. But if you have the opportunity, and something I do is, you know, make sure that there's not just one woman there. So that voice isn't just the female voice, right? It becomes one of the many voices at the table. And so for me, being competent, coaching, and making sure that there's plenty of diversity in the team across all levels is a role that I take as a leader in this space.
Thank you. Candace.
I say this a lot, but I'll say it again. One of the challenges that I face is when I walk into a room, similar to probably Justine, Chanel, and you, Amy, a lot of times I look around and see a lot of old white men. I say that every time, and I will continue to say it until we see more diverse women making decisions, you know, leading these meetings, facilitating conversation, inviting others who really can contribute and kind of build power and shift power. I've been in the electric vehicle, clean transportation, e-mobility space for about 7 to 8 years. I remember, Amy, you brought up Ecotality and the EV project in 2010. And in San Diego, we had those stations that now no longer work and need to be replaced. But yeah, just reminiscing a little bit. But for myself, I believe that transportation, e-mobility is a fundamental right. Being able to move safely and freely to where you need to go, you know, working at GM and really, you know, leveraging and being passionate about this transition to an all electric future really needs to include everyone. So I'm actually really excited that, you know, they've really committed to having 30 EVs by 2025. We're making really big investments in infrastructure, which for me is job security. Also just, you know, trying to figure out how do we get more charging, working with utilities, working with other OEM stakeholders, advocacy groups, things like that. But, you know, I would really love to see more women in this space. And I think the Women of EVs group, the WEVs group, has been really supportive. And, you know, I think for me, still trying to find my voice and make sure that I'm not afraid to kind of speak my opinions within rooms where there aren't a lot of people like me.
Thank you. Yes, I'll say that one of the reasons I became so passionate about women working in this space is when I started in 2011, and I was definitely the only female in, you know, 99% of the rooms I went into. And I couldn't talk any women into joining me. I presented to my business school about this new thing coming, EVs and charging, you know, charging 101. And I said, so like, women, this is a great opportunity. Let's go. I have an in, like, and it was right after the recession, era money. And I got no takers, none. So I mean, it's really inspirational to me to see you three here with such neat jobs and interesting lived experience. As far as your experiences, you know, we talked a little bit about the power dynamics present and how they manifest themselves. Who would like to speak to that? I know it's a trick question because I said I'd call on you, but I don't remember who said. Someone really touched on that in our practice session. or we have other things. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say happy to jump in first. I think especially as it relates to power dynamics, I think oftentimes like being a woman of color, and I think that's the first thing people see when you walk into a room, right? And that's just the reality that a lot of us live with. And you think about the power dynamics. If you have a room where you're walking into where there's decision makers who are, let's say, 98% male, that's a challenge of how do you think about inserting your opinion and making sure that those who are who are also in the room are actually hearing you and not speaking for you or mansplaining or any of the above. I think we've all been in rooms where someone has mansplained something to us where we're like, no, I completely understand that. Or taking an idea and mixing it and turning it into, something that you just said and just like remorphing that all together. So I think that's something that's, that does happen. I would say with that being the case too, I think it's the responsibility in many ways, especially as we think about how we can have more inclusive workspaces and have an inclusive environment. It's really recognizing everyone in the room. And just because you give someone a seat doesn't mean that you've actually invited them to the table and to the discussion. And I think for me, someone who I admire and look up to is like Shirley Chisholm, for example, the late great Shirley Chisholm. And I think about her because she said, I'm probably going to mess up the quote, but, essentially, if they don't give you a seat, you bring a folding chair and you have the conversation and you push yourself at that table. And I think it's always something that I keep in the back of my mind, especially as it relates to kind of this dynamic where I am kind of maybe a very different perspective and a very different position on a particular topic or policy or program or a decision. And really being firm with that, really giving the facts, really giving the examples, but also making sure that voice and that point gets heard is something that's important. But I do think it's a responsibility of everyone in the room, right? So it can't just be one person, the one woman at the table, pounding and trying to make her point and everyone in the room saying, okay, great, let's keep moving, right? And I do think, we have to, as we think about inclusive workspaces, we have to think about who's at the table, who has the mic, who gets to share the mic, and how those different opinions and voices are actually implemented and included in the decision-making process. So just wanted to talk about that.
Thank you. Is there anything, if Chanel or Candace, you have anything to say about power dynamics, I'd really like to hear it. And is there anything any of you do when you start to notice, I have had this where I'm like, I'm just done being the only one saying this one opinion. So then I have to get conscious before I go in a room and talk to myself and say like, okay, no, you're going to say it again, that torque isn't the most important thing in selling the cars. Is the thing that I used to always say. That I don't care about torque. I want a safe car that can take kids around and maybe a dog. So is there anything you do to manage the power dynamic before going in the room?
Yeah, I think Justine said a lot of really great things. And I think the one thing I wanted to just kind of plus one on was, you can invite whomever to the rooms, but if they don't have a say or they, really don't have voice, then there's no power being built and shifted there. They're not making decisions. So I think like that's really important. It's when we do outreach and engagement, inviting these partners and saying you've reached out to so-and-so is almost like a check the box kind of thing. If you're not actually being intentional with who you're inviting and having those relationships to build trust and truly want to, you value their input and expertise. And we've heard this a lot, but like paying folks when we are asking them to do focus groups and like, interviewing them for research studies as we learn more about how to get e-mobility and transportation into these communities is really critical. And I think just in terms of power dynamics, I'm much younger and I'm Asian. So when I'm in the room, a lot of the times people think that I'm the intern or the admin person taking notes. So just for me, I think recognizing that like I have the lived experience and I've worked in this space enough and, just kind of trusting my own confidence to be able to speak up and kind of make space and take space when I see that it's appropriate. And, when Amy, you asked like, what can we do to sort of manage that? One thing that I try to do is to bring others with me along this sort of journey and learning, just building awareness and education, getting butts in seats. I really love to talk about my EV. So that's just one way. I'm also, apologies, I'm in a conference room, so it's really dark. I'm going to pass it over to Chanel.
The lights went out. I love it. Chanel, go ahead.
About power dynamics, I will say there's a lot of factors that kind of factor into power dynamics, but the leader or the facilitator of a group or in a meeting or in a room really sets the tone. And if the leader or the facilitator is being very inclusive and asking others for their ideas and asking others for their input, it's very helpful. I know that's something that I very intentionally try to do when I am the leader or the facilitator in a room is, bring in other people, bring in the quiet voices, ask their thoughts and opinions. I intentionally withhold my thought and opinion because I know that oftentimes sets the tone, and then there may be people who don't want to disagree with it. And so I ask for others first before sharing my own opinion and thoughts. I think how to manage that or how to help is if you're not the facilitator or if you're not the leader in the room, sometimes it's having a discussion before the meeting or before the session or the project with the leader or the facilitator to say, hey, I have some ideas I'd like to share when we get in that room. And that way that person can give you the spotlight and give you an opportunity to speak, and you may not have to fight so hard for it, for example, in the room. Another tactic is, getting a small group or a person or two. I think Candace mentioned bring others with her. Having a discussion before the meeting, before the project, before the assignment to say, hey, what are your thoughts? Here's some thoughts I have. And sometimes it's very much easier to have some of those offline discussions. And you yourself are demonstrating leadership if you're bringing people together to talk about ideas and how to move things forward. And then once you're in that meeting, once you're in that room, once you're in that space where these dynamics appear, you've already, had some discussions, have a coalition of folks. And whether you're the mouthpiece and you're speaking these ideas or someone else speaks them, the ideas are getting out there. And folks know that you were actually the one behind setting that up. And I think those are ways that you can demonstrate power in a way that's effective and efficient and that shines a good light on you and isn't necessarily a look at me type of way, but in a way that moves the work and the mission forward.
Thank you. I really appreciate all the chats. I like Kirsten answering Alyssa's question about what's the percentage of women now in the EV industry. And it looks like for executive level positions, it's in car manufacturing, or vehicle manufacturing is about 17%. I can say from my experience, I went to one of the first roadmap conferences and there were 3 women there of about 110 people. And that is when I think I told this panel in our practice session, there was one session on marketing the cars. Of course, it had the polar bear leaf commercial. And, that was it. They were like, well, they'll buy them, because the torque. That was the main strategy. And most of the 99% of the audience did not like the marketing session. That in the feedback I heard, anecdotal. And the women, we got together in the corner and we loved it. We wanted more of that. And it was definitely a differing opinion. I'd love to know, and you can keep the questions coming either in the chat or in the Q&A. We'll certainly get to as much as we can. What do you guys think about progress on this issue? Are we progressing? How far do we have to go? What are your thoughts? I'll go out of order. Candace.
I think I think we are progressing for sure. I think there's a lot more awareness and exposure, and just thinking about transportation e-mobility in a whole different light. I think, the technology pieces of it are really critical. Transportation as a service, also thinking about, I think we are progressing, but one thing I'll say is one thing I'm really cognizant of is algorithmic bias. So with driverless vehicles and AVs, things like that, how do we ensure that safety is top of mind, especially for those who maybe are most impacted by it or maybe are at a higher risk for safety or just racial bias by this technology. So I think there's a lot of really great progress, but there's conversations that aren't being had around things like, algorithmic bias. I think we could really talk more about the justice pieces and thinking about, all of you know this, but the communities that live adjacent to oil refineries and highways are the ones that aren't at the front of, this transition to a more environmentally friendly, cleaner future. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Candace. Chanel, are we progressing with the gender dynamics in the e-mobility space?
I think we are in pockets. What I would see from my perspective is, the industry, the market's growing hugely. And because of that, you're going to get more of everybody involved. But we're still at the semi-early adopter before we, space right in the adoption curve. And I would really love to see more women of color, more people of color engage in this e-mobility space now, because the folks who are in this space now are setting what the future is going to be. They're setting the tone. They're establishing, what how we're going to play this EV game. And so my preference is that we have those voices in now, rather than when this, market and industry is so huge and we have majority adoption. And then because each voice that gets added is diluted essentially at that point, right? So right now, I think all of the voices and the bodies who are in this space have a lot of power and a lot of opportunity, right, to shape the future of the electric vehicle industry. And I think as time goes on, each additional person has just a little bit less, because there's more people involved, and we're later in the trajectory of electric vehicle adoption.
Thank you. Justine.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've made some progress. Do we have a ways to go? Yes. I think, this is just my true, honest opinion. Until we start to see more women in leadership, especially at the top of these larger private companies, government leaders, elected officials, we'll always continue to be having this discussion. So I think we need to really continue to bring women along and making sure that they're in these different spaces. I think as we think about our workplaces, what are policies and practices around hiring, around recruiting, around retention, around promotions, that's the pipeline that I think we need to really invest in to make sure that more women are in these spaces. When I think about young girls, and did I know anything about mobility, transportation, planning when I was even in college? No. And that's a problem. And so you think about, how do we bring our young girls along in this process? Girls being as young as, 6 years old, how can we start to expose them to careers in mobility, to careers in STEAM and STEM? That's where it starts, right? And if you are being exposed to all of these different opportunities, if you're being exposed to these careers, you have the confidence to say, oh yeah, I'm ready, right? By the time that you're in 12th grade, either you're going to be going to a trade school, either you're going to be going straight to a job, or either you're going to be going to a 4-year academic university. Those are all great, viable paths, right? And it's just we need to start having that conversation about all of the different pathways that are available, so that women can make informed decisions about what their future might hold in this particular space of e-mobility. So I think we have a long way to go. I appreciate the strides that have been made, for sure. And I don't take that for granted at all. I'm someone who's literally in this process of, just making as many strides as I can. And I'll continue to do that. But I also think we have to continue to bring more, specifically girls, along the way in terms of this conversation, because I think our young girls really need to get this exposure to know that it's possible to run an organization. It's possible to be an elected official and care about mobility. It's possible to run a large auto company, or whatever that might look like. It's all possible, but we need to make sure that they have the building blocks to do that.
Thank you. I want to get to what not advice, but what folks can do who want to make their workplaces in this field particularly more inclusive. Do want to say something I've seen that is promising is we had a WEV's dinner, Women of EV's dinner in Washington, in Tacoma this summer. Angela was there, me and Angela. And there were some men that came, and they came specifically to talk with us about how they can make their spaces more inclusive for women. And that was pretty inspiring. And I'll say that reminded me of, Candace, you actually reminded me of course, when I started over 10 years ago, I was just under 40. And so often I would not be sitting at the conference table. And then I would maybe, someone would want coffee, and I didn't get any coffee. I wasn't going to do that. But I remember specifically men, and even C-level men, saying, no, you sit at the table. And I know that's, could be seen many ways, but it worked because I wasn't just run into the seat. And then the other thing I did see many years ago that led us to a panel like this is I saw the first panelist at Roadmap say that they would not sit on as a panelist on a manel, an all-male panel. And so those kinds of small moves of a small voice that wasn't female or diversely female was a really nice step forward. So what can we tell people that they can do to improve the e-mobility industry as an equitable and inclusive space at their workplace, en masse, wherever you think you've got some good feedback? Why don't we go to Chanel?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. I think, in the space of the work, it's having folks sit at the table, right? It's letting folks have the microphone, right? Saying, hey, Justine, do you have some thoughts on this? Or, hey, Candace, interested in your opinion. I think if you have some responsibility for hiring and selection, it's making sure that you have a diverse pool of candidates, making sure that, you're not just interviewing 5 men for one position or 5 white men. There has to be qualified, talented, interested, women and diverse candidates out there. And sometimes it takes effort to find them, and don't let that effort scare you. I think when you have diverse voices at the table, the product that you end up with is so much better than if you don't. And so it'll benefit you if you're in a hiring position to make sure that you have a diverse pool of candidates. Recruit. If you see somebody who is young and promising, and maybe they don't even have to be young, but promising, and smart and intelligent, even if they don't have a vehicle transportation or EV knowledge, because the space is so new and it's changing, there are a lot of very intelligent people who can jump into this space and leverage transferable knowledge from other spaces and be very successful. And I'm speaking as personally, right, before jumping into e-mobility, I just had a passion for my own electric vehicle and a passion for the space, but didn't have a lot of knowledge, and jumped in and learned some things and was able to make some moves. And so I think, opening your aperture on, what does qualified look like? And qualified does not necessarily mean X years of transportation experience or X years of technology experience or X years of that. Recruit just really talented, smart individuals, folks who are passionate about this space. And that should give you some really good, diverse panels to choose for employees.
Thank you. Justine.
Yeah, I mean, I am one who believes that we have to acknowledge our past as an organization. How was your organization founded? Who was in the room when that happened? What has it looked like since the day that doors opened, or whatever that might be, a nonprofit, a private organization, whatever, right? So I think you have to acknowledge and recognize the past, because it does say a lot about where you are today. I also think there's a commitment that you want to do better, right? Like, now that you see the elephant in the room, you're saying, okay, I want to do better. This is the way in which we have to make this change. It's setting the intention and really being intentional about thinking about how we can change this organizational culture, right? Because I get nervous sometimes when it's just like, okay, we got to make sure we have more diversity in the room. And that often comes, great that you have diversity, but it's challenging when you don't have a culture of inclusion. And inclusion is so important. And so if you're not grounded in that, you'll just continue to have more numbers and people not feeling really welcomed, or their opinions or their voices not being heard. So I do think you have to look behind you in order to see where you want to go towards the future. And if you don't like what happened behind you, then yeah, put the intention towards changing that. Manifest the future that you want your company to be. If you want to have a diverse company and an inclusive work environment, you have to work every day towards that. It's not going to be a overnight we hire, X number of candidates and we're going to do it that way. Because in many ways, it'll just be a nice to have, but did we actually accomplish our goal? So I'm very big about like looking at the future is important, but we have to turn around for a second and really acknowledge how we've been as an organization all together.
Wow, I do like that. I was advised by a DEI consultant that I was involved with and paid that, like, don't just get diverse people in your organization, make it a place for diverse people to come. And otherwise you'll just be like kind of chasing your tail. So what about you, Candace?
Yeah, Chanel and Justine said some really powerful things. Definitely, reflection is so critical. Looking at, the organizations you've been in, the roles you've held, sort of what changes have taken place or still need to take place. I think to change culture, we really have to look inwards. We have to build culture in terms of, what I think we can do is really challenge more things, ask a lot of questions, understand why something was done or built a certain way. I know, just from my observations at GM, there's a lot of really like old traditional GM and like processes and ways we've done things. And for me, coming in, with a fresh perspective, I often question, like, why did they decide this? Or should we change this? Like, is this still working? We're living, in a different generation. And how do we adapt and evolve, and constantly think about how we can, just challenge and question and really innovate so we can design solutions that work for everyone, knowing that there isn't exactly a one-size-fits-all solution, but being open to suggestions and opportunities and making sure that, we have diverse voices that are really thinking about how do we really include everyone and really move us forward.
Thank you. I'd love to, anything else, panelists, before we go? If you have questions, I'll just say throw them in the chat, or you can go over to the Q&A section. I do see one we answered, and Tonya, thank you for the role model question. If you have anything you'd like to know specifically or generally, pop it in there. But from the panelists, anything that we talked about wanting to relay in this panel that we haven't gotten to? I know there were some edgier things we talked about, but anything, why don't we start with you, Justine, that, we didn't get to that you think is really important in this gender dynamics in the e-mobility space?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say altogether, like, and I feel like maybe I'm repeating myself here, but, this is a conversation about creating an environment in a space of inclusion. And I know, Amy, you mentioned before that, you had an opportunity to bring, hey, all my friends, come along. There's an opportunity for a particular job within transportation and mobility and e-mobility, and you didn't get any takers. No one was excited to go. And I'm not surprised, right? Because if you think about the culture, you think about even how you're advertised to, how products work for you or how they don't work for you. Why would you want to be excited about that? Like, who's going to be excited about that? And so I think at the end of the day, it's like we all hold this responsibility of creating a culture of inclusion and really pushing towards that. I think, I think of my own self as I continue to climb up the ladder. Like I hold the responsibility. I think Chanel had mentioned this before, and probably Candace as well. I think we probably all repeated the same things, but like it is our responsibility to continue to advocate, to continue to open doors, to continue to push doors down and create new paths, right? So more women can come along. It's about this space of really, instead of essentially thinking about products that are for people, how might we start to design products with people? How might we get real voices into the room, right? Not just like looking at a spreadsheet and just saying like, yes, X percentage of people do this, and therefore that's the answer. There's so much more behind the data, and what does the data not show us? And who might be excluded from the data altogether. So I think it's very important that we question our assumptions, but we continue to push and tell a holistic story. We create an ecosystem of inclusion. And I'm always going to push that we need to make sure that there is a strong and healthy pipeline for girls to get into these opportunities for mobility, right? I hate to hear someone say, I really wanted to do this so many years ago, but I just didn't think I could do it because I was a woman. That's like, my hope is that I live to the day where that's not a thing anymore, where someone says, no, that wasn't a barrier for me just because I'm a woman or a woman of color. You should absolutely be in the room, and you should absolutely be making those decisions policy-wise, programmatic decisions, decisions that cost billions of dollars. Women need to be behind that. We're the most rational people ever, and we actually use empathy all day long. So I can go on my soapbox, but I'll stop there and let some of my other panelists give some of their thoughts as well.
Thank you. And you're not repeating yourself. You're emphasizing differently, and it's much appreciated. And again, Chanel, Candace, this can be anything that I love that, Shelley, Dr. Shelley. Most rational people ever, women. It's true. We should be at the table. I'd love to hear anything we didn't get to before we go into Q&A. Chanel?
Yeah, I want to say thank you to Evie Noir for putting this panel on, because, that the platform and the exposure is very important. And just to springboard off of something that Justine said is a lot of people, if they don't see it, they can't be it. And while there may be many women and many women of color working in the EV space, if I am a woman and woman of color and I don't see that, I don't know what's possible for me. I don't know that I could succeed there. I don't know if I can do well there. And so I think that, to help, and how do we help break down some of the barriers, right? It's definitely allies, like we talked about in the last question. But I think also as women in this space, women of color in this space, there's a benefit to putting yourself out there and showing people this is what I do, and this is the impact that it has on communities, and this is the impact that it has on people, and I enjoy my work, and giving folks exposure to women being successful in this space so that they see, well, if she's doing it, I can do it too. And I think this panel is a great start towards that. I think, not having panels, making sure that there's diversity on all panels of all sorts that are not just talking about gender dynamics, are showing women, hey, you belong here, your voice belongs here, and you could be successful in this space. So I think just that platform, that exposure, and letting people see it, it's not just a behind closed door thing, is very important to how we progress in the future.
Thank you, Chanel. Candace?
Yeah, so many great things being said. One thing I think I want to just kind of share or speak to is sort of the workforce development lens. I think bringing girls who are young and just starting kids in general and gaining exposure to like STEM and STEAM, like Justine said, really seeing other women that are successful, like Chanel said, I think that's so critical, is just knowing that there's others who, have done this and have really persevered and succeeded. From the workforce development side, just wanting to give a shout out to Charger Help, because I think in this electric vehicle, especially the charging infrastructure space that I'm currently in, for those of you that aren't familiar with Charger Help, it's a Black woman-led startup, and they've basically built a way for really anyone to get employment by being a EV charging station technician. So they're really just doing a whole lot within this workforce development realm. And I think, a four-year college isn't necessarily for everyone. And just for me, having worked at the Foundation for California Community Colleges, I think that's a really great pathway for someone who's looking for higher education, maybe can't afford it at the time or wants to explore maybe other vocational trades, just thinking about these different pathways for all of us, especially women in this space, and really getting closer to, tapping into your inner engineer or, your inner scientist, and thinking about all of these things. So just wanted to share that last piece.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, this kind of panel is so different than it was when I first started, and many of you, and it's so refreshing. And I think whichever one of you said it, doing this often, doing it more, representation matters for folks to see it and say, oh, I could go work there. Because you're darn right, Justine. I don't blame them. They didn't come over for a reason. They were like, you're crazy. You are definitely swimming up, against the current there. One of the questions, thank you, Megan, is really twofold. What's the biggest gender barrier you've had to overcome to work in the space, or what's the biggest barrier you still feel stands in the way? I'd love to hear from you, Candace.
Yeah, for me, the biggest barrier that I'm still kind of navigating is, how do I be my authentic self when I show up at work? Can I really voice my true opinions and be accepted for kind of who I am? And maybe that's something, just imposter syndrome, thinking about my mental health. I think that's a really big barrier, just working at a really large company, working in a space where things are constantly changing and there's just so much technical jargon, I think. And also coming back to like, what is mobility, and thinking about, active transportation. I think there's just a lot. I think it's overwhelming. So for me, sometimes, I will doubt myself and trying to overcome that. So I think that's a barrier that I'm still working on. I love to just be transparent and talking about that.
Thank you. We'll go to Chanel. We'll go to I was going to go in order, but nope, can't do it. Chanel.
I was anticipating. I think one of the barriers, I think there are multiple, but I think one of the barriers is ourselves. And this may be a little, controversial, but there's been studies that have been done that show, women, not just in the mobility space, but if women will hesitate or will not apply for a job if they don't meet 100% of all of the qualifications. Whereas men may apply for that job if they meet half of them or 60% of them. And so I see in a lot of cases, women and people of all types self-select out, right? And they may see an opportunity and they may be interested, but they may say, well, I don't know that I'm qualified, or I don't know that they'd pick me, or I don't know that I would be successful in that space. And I just really encourage, if you have an interest, attack it, go for it. Let someone else tell you no, don't tell yourself no. I always tell people it's 100% chance you're not going to get it if you don't apply. But if you do apply, there's a chance that you can get it, and apply maybe for a job, or it may be, being an entrepreneur and launching, your business idea, or it may be, it can apply in so many spaces. But I think that, just really going after what you want, and don't let yourself be the person that holds you back and tell you no. Make someone else tell you no. And I think that overcoming that barrier will be helpful.
Thank you, Chanel. I'm smiling because it's great advice. Justine.
Yeah, I would say, I think in addition to, I completely agree with Candace and Chanel. I would say for me also would be like negotiating salaries. And so oftentimes I think typically when women get a offer package, whatever that might be, how often am I questioning, is this, versus being excited and just saying like, oh, wow, they want me, great. But actually questioning, okay, what's my value? And do I think this package is aligned with my value and my worth and my ability to deliver? And the number that I have, where does that fall in relation to what my coworkers are making. And so I think oftentimes like the power of negotiation is something that, again, something I still am very transparent, actively working on. I don't have the answer to it yet. But it's something that now I keep in the back of my mind, especially when it comes to your salary, and especially when it comes to making sure that you're being paid and compensated just the same way as your other counterparts, and really asking those questions, right? And so is my salary equitable to the rest of the team? And how was the salary actually determined? Was it based on my education? Was it based on my work experience? And then you still have the opportunity to say, well, actually, those things are important. How does that align with my growth here, right? And so making sure that there is space for you to grow. Do you know those things before you accept a job? Or are you going to be at a ceiling and always struggling to get over that? Are you always going to be trying to break the ceiling? And so I think negotiating is like something that I still strive to get stronger at every single day. But I do want to say that that's something I really think it's probably a very common barrier that a lot of women probably face when they are, either deciding jobs or accepting a package and not really taking that moment to say, I need some time to really think about all of this. And do I think it's fair? So yeah, I would say the negotiation part is the big thing.
I think that is great, great reminder to everyone. And that's where we can really utilize, everyone in the women in e-mobility space for, hey, I this is the offer I got. What questions do you think I should ask to determine value? I think that is key, Justine. It's not, I want more money and the men ask for more money, because that doesn't lead to value. One thing I like about the question is, and the gendering, and also what LaTonya said in the chat about the women on boards, in I know it was starting in California, is one thing I did inadvertently in the beginning, and it has to do with what Candace said about imposter syndrome. Of course, that term wasn't as prevalent 10 years ago, but I remembered thinking, oh, wait, they're paying me because I have a different perspective. They were very homogenous and just kind of agreeing. And I would have to remind myself, they're actually, the reason I'm here at all is because I think differently. And they did want that perspective. Sometimes not as, they didn't like it, but they wanted it. So I like to remind myself, oh, I'm being paid to speak up and say things that are maybe a different perspective. And I'm going to go flash over to the Q&A. Anything else, Tonya? I love your role models question, so let's get to it. Anyone, who's your role models?
Oh, just real quick, I love that Justine brought up salary negotiation. Just dropped a resource in the chat specifically for women that I actually went through. It's a free online course for salary negotiation. It was super helpful for me, and it's free. So if anyone wants to just build those skills or kind of refresh, just wanted to share that resource. But
thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. Anyone have a role model pop up in your mind to answer Tonya's question?
I can go. I have so many women role models. I usually feel like whenever I do find a woman in this space, I'm like, we're together, right? Like I get excited. So that's just me anyways. But so many people, I think of role models who I've never met a day in my life, but I really look up to them. Like I mentioned Shirley Chisholm, like I just admire everything that she has done and did, I should say she's done. So she's just an amazing force. I think is really important. I think for my living role models who I actually know, people like Tamika Butler, who is super amazing, super fantastic, does just a breath of fresh air. Tiffany Ann Taylor, who used to head Hindsight. It's essentially a conference that focused on urban planning, and it's called Hindsight, and it was just amazing work that Tiffany and her team has done. Maria Torres Springer, who used to head the New York City Economic Development Corporation, extremely intelligent, very compassionate, and it's just kind of like someone who I was like, this is kind of how I need to approach work. Like, she just took in so much information at one time. I can go on for days, but those are just like the few that come to mind who I just, have so much profound respect for.
Thank you, Justine. And at this moment, Justine's got to jump off a couple minutes early. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been incredible having you.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Bye, Justine.
Bye-bye.
Chanel or Candace, any role models?
The first person that pops to my mind when I read the question is actually Michelle Obama. And, it's from a number of different angles. One, she's very intelligent. That's something that I admire in a woman. She has pretty high EQ. She cares about people. A lot of the work and the initiatives she's put her time and energy in is to help others. She has grown to present herself well. And I intentionally say that because to me, growth is very important in a role model, not just people who wake up and they, have everything and they're smart and they have all the skills and they have all the talent. I think all of us are on a journey. And so to see someone who can go on a journey and grow and become, better than they started is something that I admire, because it's, I'm a work in progress and I want to be able to see that I can grow and improve. And so there's a number of things about her that, really, I admire. And so I would say Michelle Obama.
Thank you. I'm sure you're not alone. She's awesome. Candace?
I really loved Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, as well. For those who have read it, I see some nods, or those who haven't. I also have quite a few in mind, but I'll just name a few. Grace Lee Boggs is a big one, activist for human rights, for feminism, labor rights. She's also a writer, speaker, just someone I really admire. Also thinking about Adrienne Maree Brown. I don't know if any of you know who Adrienne Maree Brown is, but, she's a doula, also a writer. She wrote my favorite book, Emergent Strategy, thinking about, she's a facilitator as well. And just some quotes that, I took away from, and Pleasure Activism is also a really great read from Adrienne Maree Brown. But, if you trust the people, they become trustworthy. Those were some of the things, like be like water, thinking about like flexibility and how powerful water can be. Those are some of my role models.
Wonderful. That be trusting, trust the people, and what'd you say? How to say that?
Yeah. If you trust the people, they become trustworthy.
It reminds me of parenting. Just a little. And it sounds like a good strategy for everything. I would love to get to, there was one more question I saw pop up. Is there anything you think could be done better to get more women working in the e-mobility space? We'll go back to Chanel.
Anything better to get more? I think I just go back to my response of I'll summarize a couple of things I said. One is recruiting, right? Finding sharp, talented people who may have the passion. Maybe they don't have the background, but I think this still can be a very good space for them, right? And I think recruiting and being welcoming in that way. Coaching and mentoring, I think that helps as well. So identifying some really talented, candidates, or even folks who are already in the space and they're just looking to go to the next level. And I'm a big proponent of coaching and mentoring someone who doesn't look like you, and being coached and mentored by someone who doesn't look like you, because you get a lot of different perspectives. And some of my greatest mentors have been white males as well as Black women. And it's really great to have a broad set of mentors to get multiple perspectives from. And so, recruiting, coaching and mentoring. And then I think as well, doing your part to advocate for others in the room and their voices. And then lastly, just the point about, the thought just disappeared.
That's okay. That was a great, you got the important part out. Candace, anything we can do better to get more women in the space?
I love the no manels or no wannels. I thought that was hilarious, and I actually really just firmly believe in that. I think to get more women in the space, as the lights turn off on me, really like that coaching and mentoring piece is really critical. I wish I had a mentor that was in the space that could have kind of guided me. And I think I didn't really have access to a lot of resources, or just, when I started, there weren't a lot in existence because there were so few women in the space. So I think for me, I'm happy to have, organic conversations, or be a connection, or help, refer you to a role, or, whatever that may be. So just open invitation for dialogue, connection, really wanting to uplift others. What is it? When women succeed, we all succeed, kind of thing. So yeah, that's how I think about this.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, one thing in this last minute, I'll say that we talk about in women's spaces in EV events, is the benefits at a company need to reflect what women care about, just like we care about different things in buying cars. Generally, we care about different benefits at companies, and that retention being so important to women specifically, and to the company. So it's a real win-win. But if you can think about the benefits, that's super helpful. I want to thank Chanel, Justine, and Candace for a super fun panel, very informative, reminds me why I'm here, and to get more conscious before I go into meetings about what my perspective is going to be. I want to thank Evie Noir, Dr. Shelley. Thank you so much to all the women and men and everyone who joined. We really appreciate having you today. Look forward to seeing you in some sessions.
Thank you all. Nice to be with you today.